Hello, Bill. How you doing?
Good, Pat. How are you doing?
I'm excellent. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll just get going.
Okay, sounds great. My name is Bill Stretch, and I'm the general manager of the Fresno Irrigation District. I've been with the district for 25 years now, and I've served as the general manager for the past 4 years. I got to learn under my predecessor, Gary Serrato, for many years, and I've been blessed with a lot of folks that came before me that trained me up and feel like I've, well trained for the position I'm in now.
Yeah, you went to school where Cal Poly?
I did. Before we go to college, I grew up in Merced County,
Right.
kind of in the La Grande area, and then I moved to Madera when I was 12. Graduated from Madera High School, went over to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, majored in, back then it was called agricultural engineering,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
now it's bioresources and
Yeah.
ag engineering. And yes, got my first job was the Fresno as a staff engineer for the Fresno Irrigation District. I'll just say FID moving
Yeah, yeah,
forward.
yeah, yeah.
And worked there for a while and just kind of moved my way up over the years. Then to chief engineer for 10, 12 years or so, and then moved up, promoted to assistant general manager under Gary Serrato for 5 years. And then, 4 years ago, when Gary retired, I put my name in and interviewed for the job and
Great.
got the position and
Yeah.
been there ever since.
We're happy to have you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
we really are. Yeah, I noticed we were talking before that you have some heavy hitters as board members, and you always have. So
Yeah,
they're farmers. Yeah.
I'm blessed to have a great board, and I think some people minimize that, but that the board and upper management relationship is crucial to a well-run organization. So Ryan Jacobson's has been the board chair for I think at least the last 10 years or
Yeah,
so.
right,
He's
good
been on the
guy.
board for 14 years, and then I've got George Porter, Jerry Prieto, Greg Barbarian, and Chris Wolf. Yeah, they've
Excellent.
had a the board's been very stable. We just had 3 guys get reelected,
Yeah.
and they've been great for me and provided a lot of support for me.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I wanted to go over, we'll start from the beginning of Fresno. And like we were talking about, and people don't understand, this Fresno was created by water,
That's
right?
right.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Started out the Fresno Plains like 1868, some guy named Easterby.
That's right. And I probably can't quote
That's all right.
all the individuals
Yeah.
and, what,
No, we'll go
and
through them.
what they did,
Yeah.
but what I can say is that the district, we celebrated our centennial 2 years ago, so we turned 100 years old as the Fresno Irrigation District, and so that started in 1920. But what most people don't know is most of the canal system, the infrastructure was built 50 years prior to that. So
Yeah.
that's what you're talking
Yeah,
about
that's
with
what
the
we're
Fresno
talking about.
Plains,
Yeah.
and when the area was settled, and there was a Fresno Land and Canal Company. It was a private organization, and that was that took place over a course of 50 years before the irrigation
Yeah,
district was
even
actually
before.
developed.
Yeah, in 1870, Easterby, I guess he commissioned Moses Church, which is some kind of a legend here.
That's right. But we
He's
call
the
him the
man.
godfather
Godfather.
of
Yeah.
FID for sure.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
That really is. Yeah, he took the ball and ran with it. And then they named Church Avenue, I guess, after him. I guess that's where that comes from.
I believe that's
yeah,
correct.
that's why I
That's
went,
right.
because most of these guys they're named after streets or avenues. Flooding was really common back then until a long time. And Fresno, was a plain, like you were saying, and it was just like a big, huge, just roaming cattle place, till they got disorganized.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. And then, see, church started that, and then I guess he got the Fresno Canal going.
He did with Moses Church and
Yeah.
And some of the original canal infrastructure. Yeah, that more on the east side of what today is Clovis,
Right.
The east side of the Fresno Irrigation District, and so that's where some of the first farmed wheat there. My understanding is then Governor Leland Stanford was on a train ride up and came and looked at the area and thought, hey, this is with the water source here, with the soils that we have, this is a really important
Yeah.
place in California, and that's kind of the early creation of Fresno and the early legacy of Fresno.
Yeah, and then, in 1987, you had 20 acre subdivisions known as colonies, like you said.
That's right.
And there wasn't that many people here. And then it just progressed. Then Perrin, I guess that's Perrin and Clovis. Yeah,
That's right.
he's named after it. He bought a bunch of water rights and everything up. And so how does the Kings River work? It flowed into the Fresno Canal. Is that where they got the water? Or how?
Yeah, so the majority of FID supply does come from the Kings River. We also have we're part of the CVP system off Friant, San Joaquin River.
Yeah.
But so we say on average FID will import about 500,000 acre feet of water into our service area, which is 250,000 acres. And the majority of that comes off the Kings River. So on the CVP side, the city of Fresno actually has a Class 1 contract for 60,000 acre feet, and we manage that for them. We bring that in and manage that to their surface water treatment plants, the recharge basins. And then FID is a Class 2 contractor for 75,000 acre feet. So in most years, we don't see that water, but on a wet year like this, we will.
Right. And then I was, Easton came here too. He's part of, his name's on the deal, and he was part of a pioneer, an old pioneer. Everything seems to have happened in 1919 everywhere in California.
That's right. That's when the Irrigation District Act passed.
Right.
And so a lot of the irrigation districts popped up in 1920.
Yeah, and that's
Somewhere
when
yeah.
that's when everything started really forming, and that was when the Bank of America, it was called the Bank of Italy in San Francisco. I think it was one of the first banks, and that was a big thing to all this because where are you going to get your money?
That's
A
right.
stagecoach? That's what the deal was. So yeah, it's really interesting to look, and then there came a big drought in 1934. I guess that was the same drought that hit. The prairies of other states too, and depression and everything. But we had droughts back then too.
That's right.
So
It's not a new thing.
no, we live in a semi-arid desert, and we go up and down in this thing. The only thing difference is population. We've had such a high. People use a lot of water. I mean, regardless of you conserve and everything, people just use a lot of water, and when you had a population of 30,000 people and all of a sudden it goes to 700 or whatever, you guys really had to grow with.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so we're about 250,000 acres, and what sets us apart from a lot of irrigation districts, so one is the size.
Right.
So we're one of the largest land-based districts in the western United States. We have a very good water supply, so on average we'll divert on average about 500,000 acre feet. That's not the most, but that's one of the best. And one of the things that makes us different is the urban population. The urban core of the district is cities of Fresno, Clovis, and so we have about 750,000 people that
Right.
live in FID.
Yeah.
And most irrigation districts over time, they'll detach or de-annex the cities. In FID, we actually keep them within our district.
Is that right?
That's right. And I'll try to keep it brief. But
No, go ahead. Yeah.
The reason behind that is when the district was formed in 1920, if you look at a map of FID, you'll see these little holes where the city of Fresno, Clovis, Kerman, Biola, a few other spots. And basically they were carved out of the district. They either didn't want to be part of the district. It was probably that. And then as Fresno began to grow and Clovis began to grow, the groundwater levels started really dropping under the cities. And you can read reports going back to the 30s, 40s,
Is that right?
and there was recognition.
Groundwater.
That's right.
Interesting.
And so Fresno, Clovis, and FID, a lot of discussion, and over the years, there was a recognition that maybe, and there's a two-pronged problem. There was the groundwater levels were declining, and then as we were detaching and de-annexing those urban areas, FID was losing out on that revenue as well.
Right.
So what was decided, finally, we came to an agreement in the mid-70s, I think it was 1974. We entered into what we called the conveyance agreement with Fresno and another with Clovis.
Right.
And the idea was that we would keep the urban areas within the Fresno Irrigation District, and we would provide them with a water supply. Of course, Fresno has a Class 1 contract, but in addition to that, a water supply off the Kings River. And they would pay the same as the farmers do and receive the same entitlement or allotment. And that still stands today, fast forward all these years.
So Kings River is our primary water.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. And then Central Valley Project and Federal Reclamation hit in 1930s. That's big. That was the biggest of the biggest. And then they stopped. And they stopped, from what I read, was because of the war. And there was modifications, I guess, that they were going to do, and they never got done, like Shasta and everything. Right. You know, they were going to expand all that. But the Friant Dam, that was actually completed in 1945, I guess, and that was big.
That's right. That was a federal project.
Yeah,
like you said, because the war was going on, the state was not in a position to build the project, so they had to bring the federal government in.
Yeah,
and maybe one thing about Pine Flat or the Kings River, so the reservoir is Pine Flat. And that is a local project, so that's not a federal project, that's not a state, so that alone makes it a little confusing at times.
Yeah.
And you don't hear much about it because it's local, so we've, in a good way, fly under the radar at times.
So do we own Pine Flat, or how does that work?
So the Army Corps actually co-manages it with the water master of the Kings River Water Association. Yeah. And so in wet years like this year, we're not in flood release mode yet, but we might be in a week or two. And so when that occurs, then the Army Corps of Engineers will insert itself and then take control of the reservoir. And they will be in coordination with all the other reservoirs throughout the state. So that happens maybe once out of every 4 years, every 3 to 4 years. Outside of that, it's managed by the KRWA, Kings River Water Association, and the water master there, Steve Haugen. And FID is one of 28 member units. It's about half public agency, half mutual water companies. And the beauty of that project and the water supply is every drop of water in the watershed is accounted for, meaning there's a schedule, entitlement schedule, so depending how the water runs off, snow melt runs off into the reservoir, it's going to go to one of those 28 member units versus, what you see on the federal side or the CVP side. There's a lot of people involved in engineering and politics, and it could be a wet year, it could be a dry year next year, and so let's try to think about what that could be. And I use that as an example because
I agree.
Back in December of this year, before it got wet, and I'm not criticizing the federal government, it's just what we were hearing is they kept a lot of water in now I'm switching over to the
that's all right.
Millerton, San Joaquin, Friant side.
Yeah, Friant, that's fine. We can talk about Friant.
And the reservoir was kept at a very high level because they were anticipating a fourth consecutive dry year. So we're just coming out of a horrific three years of consecutive drought, 3 driest years on record combined.
Oh, yeah.
And so, who knows if it's going to be wet or dry. So the federal government is planning for a dry year. So they kept more water in behind Millerton. And sure enough, it turned wet.
Yeah.
And it got really wet.
Yeah,
right?
that's the gamble. Yeah. Well, and the snowpack has a lot to do with everything because it can rain a lot and you're in trouble if you have no snowpack. So when are they going to go look at that and give us the information on how much allocation right off of that?
Right. So right now they've done one. It's a combination of two different ways that they measure the snowpack. The historical way, so there's I think over 100 points that are either tied into telemetry that they can monitor from somebody's office, or they'll go out snowshoe and
Yeah.
take measurements, take helicopter trips up there and physically measure. So that's the old way of doing it. There's a newer way using LiDAR technology with airplanes that fly around, and they can measure in, I believe it's 1 meter by 1 meter, and figure out the depth of the snow
Whoa.
and the water content. So that's a fairly new thing to California or the Western United States, and that's something, one ask or one thing we're advocating for is to get more funding to do more of these flights. Typically, like this year, we have funding for 4 flights. When I say we, the Kings River Water Association.
Right.
And ideally, we need 8 or 10. And, whether it's ag, urban, environment, everybody counts on that water supply. So I think there's recognition both by the state and federal government that we need to dial in those forecasts a little tighter than we have in the past. So there's been one, the key first date is February 1st. So they went out and did their measurements. So right now the snow water content in our neck of the woods or in Kings River is around 148% of April 1 average. So April 1 is typically the peak of the snowpack. And so we're already past 100%. We're at 148%. So that's a huge snowpack for February 1. However, the last 2 weeks, not too much rain.
Right.
And the
A
next
little warm.
the next 2 weeks, there's really nothing out there in the forecast.
It's getting cold though.
Today was very cold.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
28 degrees where
Yeah.
I live. So where was I? Oh, so we're at 148% of our April 1 average snow water content. A slightly different metric would be the April through July runoff, how they think the snowpack will run off.
Right.
They're saying it's about 168% number.
Wow.
So, let's say 150 to 180% of normal.
Yeah, that's really good.
That's huge. That's great.
Yeah.
Thank goodness, right after
Yeah.
3 consecutive dry years.
Well, yeah. Well, and you hear it. People you have to have a business plan. How much are you going to pump? Pumping's expensive and it's not good,
No, that's
as
right.
you know. Yeah. And how much am I going to get allocation? So that all happens around then. They say, okay, you're at 0, which we've been, or you're going to get 50 or 80% or whatever, but we hope it's high.
Yeah. And so on that point, you're right. So what you're talking about is what you'll typically hear from the state and federal government.
Right.
And right now we're transitioning from last year's water year to this year's water year. So there's been no allocation made for the CVP system.
Right.
And I'm not sure what that will be. I'm going to guess it's going to be 100% class 1, and for class 2, anywhere from 20 to 50%. So that's great.
Yeah.
We haven't seen that since 2019.
Is that right?
That's right.
Wow, that's great.
So on the Kings River side, like I was mentioning, that we have I would say a better handle on what's up the snowpack and how it's going to run off and how it's going to get allocated. So some really good news. FID just came out a few days ago. We're going to start our irrigation deliveries March 1st. And so that typically only happens in very wet years. But just looking at the snowpack and what we think's going to happen, we need to get the water moving sooner than later, which is great for our farmers and the city's communities.
Yeah, they could plan for it.
That's right. And so we believe we have, it's too early to say that, if you're going to ask, well, how long are you going to run?
Right.
So we think we've got August in the bag, and with another storm or 2 or 3, then
Sure.
maybe we can run through September, October. It just depends how many more storms we get. But
Yeah.
a March through August run is excellent.
Right.
So
Cool.
we're excited about
Yeah,
that.
yeah, so am I. That's great. Now I'm going to bring you back to this is what I was because I grew up through this, was the drainage that they made. What do they call them? I call them drainage basins.
Okay. The flood control
Flood
basins
control
in
basins,
Fresno
yeah.
and Clovis
Yeah,
area?
and they grow the grass in the summer. I get to go play when I was a kid. But yeah, they built those. And that was like an engineering marvel. I mean, no one realizes that. I was reading and I was like, wow, I didn't know it was that big of a deal. People come from all over the world just to see that, you know.
I'm glad you brought that up
Yeah.
because, so when did we have the really wet storm events? In early January of this
Yeah.
year, and you hear the flooding. I live in Madera, and
So do I.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And one of the creeks that runs through, I'm fourth generation. I'm part of a farming family, fourth generation
too.
farmer. Okay.
Yeah.
And the creek that feeds our property during irrigation season overtops all the time
Yeah.
during wet years, and so there's Brenda Creek. Well, I don't want to get into
Yeah.
what goes on in Madera, but there's numerous creeks, and they flood every time
Sure.
there's wet years. And so I had one of our neighbors stop by one time. He says, "Hey, I know you work for FID. How come this stuff doesn't go on in Fresno?"
It
I
used
said,
to.
you know, the difference is
Yeah.
there's a flood control agency,
Yeah.
and it's been around since the 50s, and so so what you had mentioned was kind of in the urban area, the small, we call them flood control basins or
They're big.
storm control basins.
I think they're big.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they, anywhere from 5, 10, some 20, 30 acres in
Yeah.
the urban area. And those are designed to handle like a 10-year storm event, which is not that big. But if you go further to the east and upstream, FID has seven creeks
Yeah.
that come into our area. But many of them have flood control detention basins or reservoirs to capture that and to hold that peak that, as we get into those really wet storm events, and then they can meter the water out at a slower rate and then let it into the canal system, and then we can manage that. And so, you think what was going on in Merced County too.
Yeah.
You see in Planada, that little community got flooded. I grew up not too far from there. And, what's the difference? Well, Merced has some fairly good flood control reservoirs as well, but they've got a study out there that they need, I don't know, many millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars to improve it. So to me, the difference in Fresno is I don't know that the rainfall was that much different. It's just the facilities, the flood control facilities that we have
drainage, sure.
was able to handle it.
Yeah, it used to rain and your car, I was a little kid, I get scared in the back seat. It would float. You could feel.
Oh, wow.
Cause Shields and West was a big deal right there. And then they put that drainage right there off of, it's either Clinton or McKinley, one of those down there.
Yeah.
But I remember stopping when I was a little kid, and my great uncle was one of the guys on the big cats, and he was digging it. We went out there, and I was like, "Whoa, this is really deep," But they put them all over the place, and that's what Fresno was. It was like a big pond at one time before FID came in and cleaned everything up. And then the streets all got metered the right way where the water run off and everything in all of these. Where does all that water go that goes in those?
Yeah, great question. So this is part of what FID does, probably that most folks don't realize.
Yeah.
So historically, what we did and why we were created was to deliver water to the farming areas.
Right.
And then over time, as the cities grew, then we started delivering water to the cities in addition. And then when the flood control, prior to the flood control agency, there was something known as the stream group. So it was a group of multiple agencies, the counties, cities, Fresno, Clovis, FID, and we all agreed that there weren't enough facilities at the time. So we're going to do our best to co-manage these storm events through the canal system.
Right.
And it was problematic, which you mentioned,
Yeah.
the flooding, that was very common in those wet years. So once the flood control agency was formed, they started building, at first, were the smaller basins in the urban areas to stop that flooding. And so fast forward to 2023, I forget how many. I think the flood control basin or agency has over 150 different basins in
Right.
the urban area.
Right.
So your question, what happens to that water? So those are smaller basins. They can only handle about a 10-year storm event, and so the outlet is FID.
Right.
That they fill up and they dewater into FID. FID will deliver that water. In general, west of 99. Over the last 20 years, we've built. Right now, we're at 900 acres of recharge basins throughout our district.
Wow.
We just purchased another 400 acres in the last 2 years
Yeah, I saw that.
with Sigma in mind.
Yeah.
I know we're going to talk about that
Yeah.
some more. And so when I first got to the district 25 years ago, this time of the year, the non-irrigation season is our maintenance and construction.
A lot of that.
We viewed that as nuisance water,
Yeah.
and we got it out of the district. We needed to work on our canal system, pipeline system, and so we had moved that water outside. Fast forward to, well, actually, starting about 15 years ago, we started expanding our recharge basins, and fairly large, 40 acres, 80 acres,
Yeah.
120 acres at a time. And the plan, even before Sigma, was there was recognition by the district that we had declining groundwater levels, and we wanted to capture every drop of flood water that we could. So first, it starts with the urban pumping that comes from city of Fresno and Clovis, and then if it gets really wet, then the foothills are saturated, then they start running off the creeks, then that flows into our system as well, and then over the past few weeks, the CV or San Joaquin River was flood releasing too, so we started bringing in CVP class 215 or flood water as well.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I got a big kick out of that. And then, you opened up a lot of ground for water storage, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Today we have 900 acres of active recharge basins.
900 acres.
That's right.
It's a lot.
Yeah, and most of it was done in the last 15, 20 years under Gary Serrato and that board.
Yeah.
Like I said, there was a recognition that we've got declining groundwater levels. We need to do something. Let's capture that groundwater and store that underground. And then we facilitate some water programs here and there with it as well. But for the most part, it was to help steady that decline of the groundwater table, and it has helped. And in these wet years is when where we can really make a difference,
Right?
And because we can, over the last 3 years, not much water has gone to those basins because it's been dry, but now it's wet, and that's the way the district was formed. That's the way we've always kind of managed, but that's just a newer tool in our tool belt.
Yeah.
Is the recharge basins.
Yeah. A pat on the back for all that. I mean, you guys have really done well. You've been in front. I mean, people don't realize you've been in front of everything. And the water, this and that. Oh, these guys,
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's previous management and the board, they had a good outlook on what was coming and made the investment. And I mentioned earlier, we just purchased 400 acres of basins.
Yeah.
We took out a $20 million loan 2 years ago, and went out there and started knocking on doors. And typically there's 3 things we need. We want to build we want to purchase land and build a basin right off one of our main flood canals where we route flood water. And ideally, most of our soils in FID is pretty good.
Yeah.
On the east side, the soil's a little tighter, so the recharge isn't quite as good. But in general, we can perk about half a foot a day, which is pretty good. Better than most, not as good as our neighbors in Consolidated, where they've got really sandy ground. And then we need a willing seller.
Yeah.
And most folks in FID don't want to sell their ground. So and I get it because, what my understanding is most farm ground in FID is going, anywhere from 38 to 45,000 an acre.
real estate value.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And why is it so high versus like Madera's a little bit less, and then in areas known as the white areas where they have no surface water supplies, it's
Yeah.
maybe at least half of that, or maybe even a third of that. And it's FID's water rights and water supply.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. I got a big kick out of reading about it. People don't understand. You know, it's interesting because 99, actually, the Kings River would overflow over 99.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's happened a couple times in my lifetime that I've seen that. I was like, man, that was a lot of water to do that.
It's hard
you
to
know?
picture.
Well, yeah, it was a big swamp out there at one time. Um, yeah, about what is it, Sigma?
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
so that was formed in 2014. It was the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, right?
That's right.
So what all happened right then?
So my understanding is they've been talking about groundwater laws, managing groundwater since the 1970s. For those of us that have been around, and I wasn't too old at that time, but
Yeah, I've been around
that
there.
was a pretty massive drought in
Yeah.
76, 77. A lot of wells went dry, and but they didn't act because not long after, I think it was 78 was a really wet year. And,
Yeah.
everybody breathed a sigh of relief. But fast forward to 2014, that was another, I forget if that was a 4 or 5 year consecutive drought years, and groundwater levels were plummeting. But I think what really caught the attention of the state was some of the smaller communities that are typically more disadvantaged, poorer. Their wells started going dry, and up on the east side, it's not a matter of drilling a well deeper because you hit bedrock, and there was nothing they could do. And even if the state or feds gave them grant funds or a loan to go drill new wells, in many cases they couldn't go deeper. So then they had to come up with other solutions, bringing in the green tanks to truck in water, provide bottled water. And so I think that alone got all kinds of alarms went up,
Right.
and something needed to be done. And I always joke that California, in most ways, we have the most amount of regulation when it comes to about anything.
Everything. Yeah.
But we were the last state to adopt groundwater laws.
Really?
Yeah, which I think is fascinating
Yeah,
for most people. So yeah, like you said, the law passed in 2014.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to it, but when you cut through most of it, it's to become sustainable, to make sure your groundwater supply is sustainable.
Right.
And so that's a loose metric, and every agency describes it a little differently. And so what has happened, fast forward a couple of years, we had to form what was called a groundwater sustainable agency, a GSA. And so this is like a totally new layer of government was and is formed.
Jeez.
And then we had to develop a plan known as a GSP, or a groundwater sustainability plan, and submit that to the state. So we are part when I say we, Fresno Irrigation District is part of the North Kings GSA. The North Kings GSA was one of 7 member units, or 6 other GSAs that make up the Kings subbasin. So I forget how many groundwater basins or subbasins are throughout the state, but every one of these groundwater basins in the San Joaquin Valley is critically overdrafted, except I think Turlock and Modesto. And so that means by 2020, we had to submit a plan, and then we have to become sustainable over a 20-year period by 2040.
Yeah.
So we submitted the plan. We got a kickback, got kicked back by the state, and they kicked back to everybody's, and they wanted us to address a few other items. So that's before the state right now. DWR has until March 31st of this year to adopt it, approve it, or say it's insufficient, and we don't really know what they're going to do. My understanding, in the next day or two, there's a big meeting with them to get some sense. So we're on pins and needles right now, wondering,
Jeez.
what's next.
What else is new? Right.
But what can, and I've mentioned throughout this, I say we, FID is a
Yeah.
member, we are one of 10 member agencies as part of the North Kings GSA.
It is so complicated.
It is,
Yeah.
and so the cities, the county, the smaller communities, we all make up the North Kings GSA. But the lion's share, the majority of the water supply comes from FID or exported. Imported.
Yeah, I was
water
going to get
supply.
into that. So you import like 500, 500,000 acre feet.
That's right.
Whoa.
And so just to put that in context, that's about the same volume as what's held behind Millerton Dam or in Millerton Lake behind Friant Dam.
How many people? So what will that like 400,000 people for a year or something like that? I don't. It's a lot of people.
I think that's the right.
Yeah, it's something like that. But yeah, that's what it is. So that's probably because of population growth.
As far as
Maybe.
the
Get your look at it. The import of the water. Why we're importing so much water.
oh, I see.
Yeah.
I mean, really, what that dates, it dates back to our early water rights.
Oh, is that right?
Off the Kings River.
Yeah.
And so it was before this was a very, populated area, and it was just our forefathers, FID's forefathers, did a great job.
Yeah, they were smart.
in securing the necessary water rights
Yeah,
for this area.
We've got hard pan. That's what I call it. There's a name. It's a clay.
Did you grow up in the fig garden area?
Oh
or-
yeah. Oh yeah. So yeah, you can only because that's where all the figs were and everything. So they had to dynamite
That's right.
and blast because it's so thick. You go down like a foot or two, and you just hit 3 feet, 4 feet of concrete. That's what you can hit that thing with a pick. And
I
and
totally understand. I'm a farm kid. I've had to dig through a lot of hard pan to
oh yeah,
plant trees and other things. So yeah.
yeah,
it's tough.
So, yeah. I don't know how these guys did it. These old timers. They showed a picture on your website. I got a big kick out of it. They all standing around with shotguns, guarding their water.
Those early days and securing water rights. And,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's a whole separate topic of how those water rights were developed. And sometimes it's first in time, first in line, and you go post a notice and
Is that
stand
right?
there with a shotgun and make sure nobody goes and tears your notice off. And
Yeah, the horse and plow and everything.
the Fresno scraper. All the FID canals were built with those Fresno scrapers and
Is that right?
mules and
A long time ago. What else are you going to do?
1860s,
Yeah.
1870s, yeah.
Yeah, they built more or less. They built them by hand. I
Yeah.
mean, horse in you call it a scraper. What is a big disc looking thing?
I mean, it's a pretty small scraper. It's probably
that right?
4 or 5 feet wide.
And they just keep on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you just dig a little out.
How did they get through the hard pan?
That's a good
They
question.
did it. Yeah. Well, it's like gold. How did they get so much gold out of the land? Those guys were just tough guys.
And labor was cheap and you used a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, that's why we're here today. It's because of that. Because you're from that lineage. I'm from the same thing. We've been around. Our forefathers go back a ways.
That's right.
1920 or so, I think. And and they came here again, like you said. You either farmed or what did you do? Go gold in California?
That's
It
right.
was either farming or gold. And they saw. I don't know how they did it. They saw that they had these visions of the future of land and water and good soil, all this good stuff, and farm. They were smart. I don't know how they did it. I really don't.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing what they did in the late 1800s and without computers, without mechanized equipment. And
Yeah, you didn't, it was one of these, is it going to rain today? But yeah, we live in a semi-arid desert, and people don't understand is we created this. It didn't create itself,
Right.
right?
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and I like to say is farming created cities. Cities didn't create farming.
That's right.
So these large San Francisco, Los Angeles, they need to understand that that food comes from somewhere, and it comes from here. A lot of it comes from here, and it's very special and very hard to come by, And these guys, farmers are the best business people in the world. They really are.
That's right.
Hey,
Totally agree 100%.
oh, they got so much against them. I don't know how they do it.
Yeah, I mean, my family sells farms, and yeah, just the added regulations and
Yeah.
the issues that they have to deal with versus, just 20, 30 years ago makes it really, really hard for most of the average farmers. And the FID is a little unique that way. Going back in time,
Yeah.
we have 8,500 customers, farmers. So we have a lot of small mom and pop farmers.
Yeah.
The average parcel size was 20 acres.
Yeah.
And that's changing, but historically that's, and on the east side, what I call the east side, whether you're in consolidated irrigation or Alta or a lot of the CVP contractors, they're all a lot of very small parcel side.
Yeah.
Versus the west side of the valley.
Yeah. There was a lot of land consumption. It kind of built up to it. I guess it was with the water and everything kind of all came together. But these guys bought up a lot of land to get the water rights
That's right.
out of it and create things. And it's really interesting to me the way everything was made. People go, oh, I'll just drive over there and get some food and stuff. It's like, you have no idea what went into this, and you should. People should really, like we were talking about, this is a big education and everything. So, yeah, we talked about groundwater and how important it is and everything, turning on that faucet. So do you do use water and everything? Do you deal with that also?
As far for in the cities, or
yeah.
So our water supply, and I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, so redirect
No, go
me.
ahead. Yeah.
So most of the water FID imports goes to farmers and to the cities.
Right.
Actually, the cities of Fresno and Clovis, they make up probably a third of our allotment goes to the cities, just because the land mass that they've, as much as the cities have grown over the years. We also have just recently negotiated contracts with the cities of Kerman, Community of Biola, and we're working with some of the others. With Sigma in mind, it kind of, those cities and smaller communities who've historically just pumped groundwater said, hey, we want to do our part, just like the bigger cities do. And if that means building our own recharge basin and intertwined with one of your canals, then we'll do that. So that's in progress. So that's a good thing.
That's my question.
And so what we don't do with the cities, so the water that's utilized by the cities goes to two primary spots.
Right,
One is the surface water treatment facilities. City of Fresno and Clovis built their first ones, I think it was 2007. Fresno built a second one maybe 5 years ago. And then prior to those, and they still do it this way, is in the in the flood control basins we were talking about earlier, there's dual use to those.
Yeah.
So historically they were only used for flood control purposes, but if you drive by those in the late spring and summer months, you see them full of water. It's like, why are they full of water?
Yeah.
Well, that's FID is diverting water into those basins and is percolating down into the aquifer. So that's how the city uses their water allocation off the Kings River system. And
that's so interesting. So that's gray. Is that gray water?
No, that's raw.
That's raw water.
Raw surface water.
Okay.
And then at that point, FID, but we don't do anything.
You back
past
off.
That.
Yeah.
Yeah. The city will then, they've got their own, it's their treatment facilities that they'll treat, and then that becomes potable water, and they inject that into the city
So
water
everything
supply.
coming off the sprinklers and everything is running into those water ponds, right? Or no?
The runoff coming from the sprinklers goes down the curb and gutter. It drops into pipelines and eventually into the the stormwater basins that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so during the summer months, that would just percolate down into.
Yeah, that is so interesting. Yeah, we're able to recycle what we use, the runoff.
That's right.
We don't waste anything for good reason. So what are your future plans? Where are you guys heading?
So a couple big things going on right now. Right. One is defending our water rights. There's So we've talked about kind of the importance of why FID is where it's at today.
Right.
Was primarily our water rights that were negotiated back, by our forefathers and creators of FID. So with Sigma in mind, everybody is either is critically overdrafted or slightly overdrafted. So now there's a fight for a little bit of floodwater that's in the system. And so right now there's an attack on our water rights from a water storage district down in Kern County. And so we're in front of the State Water Board right now, and we're about 5 years into it, into this fight. And this will go on, I think, another 10, 15, maybe 20 years. It's very expensive. We have some of the best water rights attorneys in Sacramento, hydrogeologists, engineers. We now have a historian. And just to tell the story and to defend those water rights, that we need to keep that in this area, because even as much as we have and as much as our cities use and our farmers use, we still have declining water tables.
Yeah.
And we're, that's part of the reason why are we building more recharge basins? It's to capture even
That
more
runoff.
flood water when it's around, and to sustain those groundwater tables or the aquifer. And so that's one big fight that's going on right now. And I suspect there will be more on the Kings River system. There will be, I'm sure of it, on the San Joaquin River system. And we're in the early stages of the groundwater fight. And there will be legal challenges. You're starting to see it play out in Madera County a little bit, and Tulare and other places. So it's coming, and we're prepared for it. And it takes a fair amount of money to defend yourself and to have the right team in place.
Yeah, people are still arguing about they want each other's water.
Yeah,
so
right.
Kern County, they get their water. Do they get any water from the Colorado River? Is that what's going on?
Well,
or the population?
some of those districts get they're part of the Friant-Kern Canal system.
Oh, is that
or
right?
Coming off Friant.
Yeah.
So some of them get water through that system. Some get it off the State Water Project, and some, there's other, you got the Kern River running through there, so there's some supplies that come off that. But that's just like everywhere else in the state, it's a very arid climate, and
everybody wants to grow, and it's people. I mean, population's a big thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, you asked me kind of what are some of our
Yeah.
upcoming challenges.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
one is defending our water rights
Sure.
and protecting those. Two is we're an aging district, so we're over 150 years old, most of our infrastructure. And so just having the revenue stream needed to maintain and continue and do some capital improvements, whether that's replacing some of our old pipelines, a little canal lining, structure rehab, automating some of our sites. So that's a big part of it too. We're about 700 miles of canals. We have more pipeline systems now than open channels.
Yeah, that's good because of the evaporation. Yeah.
That's right. However, we're a little unique, and if you listen to us talk a lot about recharges, a lot of our open channels, we purposely do not concrete line unless we have to for other reasons, because we want the percolation to occur through the open channels. So that's contrary. Like if you go to other areas where water is much more tight, they'll concrete line it,
Yeah.
so they save every drop.
Yeah, I see
so
that.
it's just different in our neck of the woods. We're in a good way for us. So that's a big part. And then groundwater sustainability, that's huge for us. Even before Sigma rolled around, we were already, as I mentioned, in the business of purchasing land to build recharge basins,
Right.
capturing all the excess water or flood water, or not excess, but flood water, what's coming off the creeks, coming out of the cities. So we're going to continue doing that. And so we're just kind of in that next phase. We purchased 400 acres, and now we're going to build. We've got to engineer them, we got to permit them, and then we're going to build them. And the beauty of the recharge basin versus, some people might ask, well, what about above ground storage? Or did we just give up, or what's the likelihood? So I'll answer the beauty of the recharge basin is, we can go purchase land, get it engineered, permitted, excavated, and water going into it within about 2
Immediately.
years.
Yeah.
About 2 years. That's really quick. Versus, we took a stab at Temperance Flat a few years ago.
Yeah.
That's not
They're
really
very expensive.
very, very expensive. And there's going to be a lot of legal
Permits and,
fights and the permitting of it. And I think Sites Reservoir up north, Northern California, I think that will go forward. And
Yeah, some guy up there, I was reading, he's got some huge amount of land. They wanted to flood it and everything. And that's a good, like you said, I think that's the catch, to get around all this other stuff.
Right.
Rather than these big reservoirs and dams and stuff, it's too expensive.
And, maybe if the priorities shifted or changed in California, then
They're not.
I don't. I think you and I are being very realistic about the future, and so that's the way most irrigation districts are looking at it. So we're not the only ones building recharge basins. Most of our neighbors and most districts up and down the state are doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And which is a good thing.
Yeah, that's smart.
And what else was I going to add? Oh, we mentioned the flood control reservoirs. There's one up near Clovis. It's called Big Dry Creek Reservoir. It's a fairly large one. It's been around since the 40s, and it was originally built in the 40s. Then they raised the levees around it in, I think it was the late 80s, early 90s.
Where's this at?
So this would be Shepherd and Fowler Avenue, roughly.
Yeah.
In that neck of the woods. And
I know where it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you drive by on Shepherd, you'll see these large berms or levees. And so that's a great reservoir. It has a pretty good watershed. And right now we're capturing that water, or bringing in that water that's from all these rain events that have occurred. And but that's a flood control facility that's managed ultimately by the Army Corps of Engineers. And so
wow.
And it's meant for flood control really only.
Yeah.
So we're working with those entities and try to get them to reoperate it. And what I mean by that, it's pretty simple. It's just, can we hold that water for a 2 or 3 month time frame? And it's a 30,000 acre foot reservoir. That's a lot of water, and that would mean a lot to this area. So if that means we have to, widen the levees, or maybe we have to concrete line portions of it, that's fine. But there's the process and the permitting that we have to go through to do that is massive. And so we're talking to our politicians. In fact, I was talking to Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. Congressman Kevin McCarthy was here in Tulare and Clovis the last few days. And so we've talked to their folks, chief of staff, and so seeing if we can get any help from the political side. Congressman Jim Costa, he's helped us in that effort as well, helped us get some funds to do some studies.
Good.
And so that's another part of what we're doing. And but those types of issues or fights, the process we have to go through, that's not a 1 or 2 year deal. That's more like a 10 to 15 year deal. So that's why we're going really hard and heavy on the recharge basins.
Yeah. I think that's smart. Well, you got to get. They aren't going to go. They aren't going to go nuclear facilities, because that's just a nightmare of regulations and lawsuits and everything. I mean, it would be great desalination plants.
Totally agree. If the cities could utilize more of that water, that frees up water to be used for agricultural areas or the San Joaquin Valley, that would be a great plan. But that needs to be driven by the state.
Yeah, that's well, and it's stage 4 too, nukes, and it's a whole different thing of Chernobyl and what people think these nuclear desalination plants. This is Saudi stuff, They know what they're doing. So, and you don't have any problems or anything like the old nuclear facilities. What else is there? I mean, I think it's going in the right direction. With those facilities you're working on. That's great.
Absolutely. And there's, if you talk to other folks, like we're part of the Friant Water Association Authority, I'm sorry, and and whether it's the state water contractors or the CVP systems, there's regulations in place for the biops, the biological opinions, and how the water is operated. And so if there's some regulatory reform there, if things could be maybe go back to the biops that were used several years ago,
Yeah.
that are a little more friendly towards cities, farms, without having much impact, if at all, on the fisheries in the San Joaquin River and others, and that'd free up more supply. But that's a fight with the federal government and state right now, and but that's crucial. There's a ton of water going out to the delta, and the ask is just a little bit more of that,
Yeah.
which historically we had,
Yeah.
and now we don't.
Yeah.
And so that has an impact on the cities and the farms.
That's a whole nother ball.
That's right.
It's just,
And when you take that water supply, what happens? The cities and the farmers have to rely on groundwater more.
yeah.
And then the groundwater levels decline. And then there comes along SGMA, the groundwater law. And so really like to see the state step forward and help in that regard with the biops and the federal government as well.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening with that. It's so confusing, and I did some deep dives in it and everything. It's just like, geez, there's environmental, there's all kind of crazy things going on, and it's like, well, it's got to go somewhere, and you can't keep doing this. But they're going to do what they're going to do. But like we talked about, the dams it's too expensive. These water holding deals are the best. So how did you guys get through COVID? I mean, that must have been a real nightmare.
Every agency handled it a little different.
Yeah.
I'm proud to say that I never stopped going to work. I
Yeah.
showed up every day, as did the folks that worked at FID. We have about 85 employees. We continue to work, and we just had the workarounds and learned
Right.
to, for those of us that work inside an office, learn to work from, virtually.
Yeah.
And so we got through it just fine.
Well,
Our
yeah.
guys
I mean, there's maintenance issues. There's all that.
That's
stuff.
right. I mean, 2/3 of our organization are folks that work in operations and maintenance.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
big.
we needed to be out in the field, making sure our canals and pipelines were up and ready for the water season. And when the water season came, we had to make sure we were delivering water to the growers, to the cities, and we did that. We never missed a heartbeat. So I'm proud of what
Yeah.
we did. And
Yeah.
I mean, by a stark contrast, sometimes when we deal with other agencies, let's say in Sacramento, they're still virtual. They have never gone back.
Is that right?
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
just it's a weird world at times. And
Yeah.
not to say that certain jobs you can do virtually, but in our line of the work, I mean, a lot of it's boots on the ground.
Yeah,
and
you gotta-
I can't.
Yeah. You
I
can't
can't fix
rely
it
on a meter.
That's right.
Yeah. Hey, yeah, that meter says this. It's like, phew, yeah. Wait till you see the water coming out of that
Yeah.
bad baby, and the loss and everything. You can't do that. You got to have hands on, like we said. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think we
We
covered
covered
it.
a lot of stuff. Huh?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
good.
maybe one minor plug here at the end.
Yeah.
So FID is primarily funded through assessments, taxes, and there's a law that was passed in California in 1996 known as Proposition 218, and which basically stripped the rights of our local electives to raise assessments or taxes as needed. So we have to go through a process. We have to hire an engineer, put together an engineer's report, and the concept or idea wasn't the worst thing. Basically, just make sure that the benefits that you're providing are appropriate and are funded appropriately. And so, anyways, we're just in the early stages. Our board, we agreed 5-0. I have a 5-person board to improve assessment increase, and so. We've started sending out letters to our growers. I'm in the process of going to coffee shops, being in people's shops, barns, wherever they want to meet, and just for me to get that word out, educate on why we need to increase our assessments. And so the ballots are going to go out in April, so the growers will receive those. We'll have a hearing in June 8th, that will count those ballots. And you know, I mentioned before, kind of there's three key areas that we're focusing on. One is defending our water rights,
Right.
groundwater sustainability, and then surface water infrastructure. And so those are the three key areas, and it's something we have to. We don't have a choice. We have to address those areas, and the last time we did a Prop 218 election was back in 2017. So we can make small increases over a 5-year period. So we're going to level out in our revenue streams, and so we need to increase those assessments. And back in 2017, Sigma was just in the early infancy stages. We weren't quite in the middle of that water rights battle yet, and inflation. No, we didn't predict what has
Right.
happened to the
Yeah, yeah.
world. So just appreciate the grower support there, and be more than happy to come out and talk to anybody.
Excellent. We're happy to have you, and I'm glad we have you. And it sounds like everyone's doing a great job over there.
Yeah, Pat, thanks
So
for
I
inviting me.
appreciate it. Thanks. Have a great day.
All right.